Part 81. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 801. There are still 8 days before the new year. The city of Liang is decorated with lanterns and colorful decorations. Merchants are walking through the streets like flowing clouds, which has revealed the joy of welcoming the spring and bidding farewell to the old year. Although it is located outside the Great Wall, Liangcheng is not much different from the cities in the heart of the Central Plains at first glance. Only the men on the street have their hair down, lacking the elegance of literary robes and jade crowns. As the capital of the Eastern Line, the residence of Zhang, the right prince of Northern Qi, was built on Yangji Street in the city. Zhang led the southern expedition to Daiyue, and now he is fighting with Guo Zhongxian in Hedong. He can't come back as the new year is coming to an end. The palace is a little deserted, and only the servants are sweeping the snow outside the wall. It was already dark, and the carriages and horses were intertwined on Yangji Street. In the brothels and wine shops on the street, the sound of humming and the laughter of women were heard one after another. Su Buling drove a small carriage, his eyes swept the streets, looking for where to get a room tonight. Kui Zioan opened the window a little, glanced at it, and found no unusual street scene, so she sat forward a little, and asked Su Buling back to back inside and outside the car door. "Aren't you going to destroy the alliance between the two countries? Where are we going?" Su Buling wanted to disrupt the alliance between the two countries, but he didn't know the specific location of the envoys. He drove the carriage slowly and said with a smile, "It has been arranged long ago. Let's find an acquaintance to ask and find out the situation of the envoys team. Do you have acquaintances in Baiki?" "Yes, I know them well." While Su Buling was talking, he stopped the carriage at the side of Yangji Street, called out the little sparrow from the carriage, and gave a few instructions. The little sparrow flew to the roof without complaint and searched on the busy streets. Liangcheng is the core of Mobei, just like Suzhou City in the western regions. Merchants from all sides gather here, and the scale is very large. However, most of the rich gentry will not run to the civilian area, but are concentrated in the prosperous area around Yangji Street. Although located in the northern frontier, the ancestral homeland of the nobles of northern Qi is in the Central Plains. It is inevitable to feel homesick as the year draws to a close. There are wine parties and poetry gatherings everywhere on the streets. There are also scholars who recite poems and couplets to express their hope for restoration in the attics and pavilions. The little sparrow circled around Yangji Street for a few times, and quickly found its target according to the sign of the right prince's mansion. It flew back from the street and landed on Su Buling's shoulder. Su Buling took out the peeled pine nuts, put them into the mouth of the little sparrow, and drove the carriage to the outside of Chunyua Hall on the same street. Chunyua Hall is a place of romance. The lights in the pavilion were just on. The courtesan who came here from the inner pass had just stepped on the stage. The nobles of Liangcheng gathered below the stage, and the greetings were endless. In the private room on the second floor in front of the hall, Zhang Kai, the prince of the right prince of northern Qi, sat on a carved soft couch, wearing a white snow fox fur coat, and glanced at the dandies in the hall with a little impatience in his eyes. As the legitimate son of the right prince, Zhang Kai was on par with Su Buling in terms of status. He was originally a dragon among men in northern Qi. At the beginning of the year, when the border of Daiyue was broken, Zhang Kai was able to lead more than 10,000 elite cavalry as the vanguard and won the honor of being the first to step into the territory of his hometown, which showed his status in northern Qi. It's a pity that the dragon among men can't compare to the exiled immortals from heaven. Outside Taiyuan City, Zhang Kai was captured king in front of thousands of troops and became the highest-ranking prisoner of war after the last emperor of northern Qi. After that, he was almost imprisoned to death in Chang'an City. He had to trouble the national teacher Zhou Qingkaiu to take risks and rescue him alone before he escaped with great difficulty. Not only did he lose his troops and 2 chasing wind horses, but he was also completely lost. After this incident, Zhang Kai's status in northern Qi plummeted and he became a laughing stock among the younger generation. If it weren't for his mother's strong background, the status of crown prince might have been taken away by the furious right Prince Zhang Heng. After escaping from Chang'an City, Zhang Kai was too embarrassed to lead the frontier soldiers to charge into battle again. He resigned from his military post and stayed in Liangcheng honestly. After a few days, the Prince Zhangdu had the coming-of-age ceremony, but he was too embarrassed to return to Yancheng. Next to Zhang Kai sat Zhou Qingkai's son Zhou Zhan. Zhou Zhan was Zhang Kai's good friend. His experience was not much different from Zhang Kai's, but with Zhang Kai standing in front and being scolded, the pressure was always lighter. Seeing that Zhang Kai was a little bored, Zhou Zhan said. Prince said in the past that he wanted to see Miss Yu'er style. Now that Miss Yu'er has finally been invited to Liangcheng, why are you so depressed again? It would be a miracle if Zhang Kai could be happy. He picked up the teacup and took a sip. What's the use of just meeting someone? It was said that we would attack Taiyuan to see Miss Yu. Until now, I still don't know what Taiyuan looks like. I have been to Chang'an. Now I just want to see Lady Jia. We agreed to attack Chang'an in the future and let her be the princess. How can I break my promise again? Zhou Zhan shrugged slightly. A real man can bend and stretch. There is no hurdle that cannot be overcome. The national teacher is discussing the alliance between the two countries. Once it is decided, the army will cross the Yellow River next year and return to Chang'an sooner or later. Zhang Kai knew that Zhou Zhan's mind was on the girl downstairs. He was so perfunctory even when comforting people, so he didn't drag him to talk nonsense. Raised his hand. If you want to go down and say hello to the girl, go ahead. I want to be alone. Zhou Zhan laughed and didn't say much. He got up and went down the stairs. The sound of music and laughter echoed in Chunyua Hall. Zhang Kai looked at the romantic scene below. He might be a little bored. Following the beat, he tapped the armrest of the soft couch with his fingers and hummed a little tune. Dong. Just after humming a few words, Zhang Kai felt a knock on the back of his head, and heard a sentence. It's a good start. The voice sounded familiar, but he couldn't remember who it was. Before Zhang Kai had time to think, he fell into endless darkness. I don't know how long it took before biting cold water was splashed on my face. Zhang Kai suddenly woke up. The place he was in had changed from a warm elegant room to a broken house. Judging from the noise on the street outside, it should be in the back alley of Chunyua Hall. Woo dash. Zhang Kai was about to shout for help, but found that his mouth was blocked. Looking up, there were two people standing in the shabby room with bare walls. In front of him was a man from the countryside wearing a sheepskin coat. He was half crouching on the ground with a straight knife in his hand. His face was somewhat hidden, his hair was shawl length, and his eyes were smiling, as if he had met an old friend he hadn't seen for many years. Behind the man in the world, squatting was a girl dressed in red fox fur. Her body was as thin as a willow's and her eyebrows were picturesque. Her age was indistinguishable. She looked like a mountain spirit who had just transformed into a human form. She also had a somewhat unworldly appearance. Dust fairy spirit. Such a handsome girl. As a man, Zhang Kai's first sight must have been on the girl, and his eyes lit up slightly. But after seeing the dazzling peach blossom eyes of the charlatan next to him, his expression suddenly froze again. Zhang Kai. Su Buling held his sword in his hand, looked at Zhang Kai who was tied up, removed the rag that was gagging him, and said with a smile. Your Highness, I haven't seen you for a year. Do you think you don't recognize me? Zhang Kai stared and looked left and right, as if to confirm whether it was a nightmare. When he realized it was not a nightmare, he became frightened and obviously wanted to call for guards, but he quickly realized it and lowered his voice, wanting to cry without tears. Oh, my mother! Why are you staring at me alone? Prince Zhou also has a son, and there are several princes in Guiyan City. It's not easy for me to get a good pregnancy, and I haven't done anything harmful to God. Kui Zioan squatted next to him obediently, kidnapping with her boyfriend. When he heard this, he said in a funny way, "The noble prince of the feudal lord, why are you so cowardly? Can I not be cowardly? I saved my life last time. After finally escaping, it was so hard to catch a sheep. Who could stand it?" John Kai had nowhere to vent his anger, so he leaned against the corner and complained in a polite tone. "Brother Su, we are both princes. Can you please tell me some truth? What's the point of you coming to me? I don't even have troops anymore. I want to find my father. Even if you chop me to death today, I won't go to Chang'an. Well, it's better to be broken than to be ruined. I have a temper, right?" Su Buling raised his eyebrows. "Be honest and cooperate. I won't send you to Chang'an this time." John Kai knew he had no power to resist, so he panicked when he heard these words. "Don't kill me. I'm really useless. Killing me won't solve the problem. Take me to Chang'an as a hostage. Maybe you can exchange me for something." Su Buring raised his hand, interrupted John Kai's words, and asked, "In recent days, has Northern Qi secretly been in contact with the four Eastern kings to discuss an alliance?" John Kai simply shook his head. "I am banned in Liangzhou City and have no idea about these things." Kui Zioan squatted in front of Su Buling, looked at John Kai's face, and whispered, "He's lying." John Kai frowned, but did not dare to get angry. He laughed out loud and said kindly, "Girl, please don't talk nonsense, your life is at stake, I speak from the bottom of my heart." Su Buling naturally believed Kui Zioan's words, drew out the straight knife, and looked at John Kai's hands and feet, as if considering where to strike. Kui Zioan turned around when she saw this, not wanting to see a scene that was too bloody. John Kai's mental endurance was limited, so how could he dare to be stabbed? When he saw this, he quickly begged for mercy. Okay, I said. My father has such a plan, and the palace staff have discussed it, but I really don't know how to form an alliance. With the national strength of Northern Qi, Dongyu must come to us, and we can't be the first to go there. Seek peace." Su Buling nodded. Did Dongyu's envoy ever arrive in Northern Qi? Where was he? John Kai hesitated for a moment and then said, "The envoy must have arrived at the Foreign Affairs Pavilion this morning. He will leave for Guiyan City in the next 2 days. I just know about this. I don't know who is coming. It is all arranged by my father and the imperial court." Kui Zioan had been paying attention to John Kai and nodded. "You are quite honest. Remember to give birth to a good child in your next life." John Kai's face turned pale and he thought Su Buling was going to silence him, so he quickly said, slowly, "I was reborn very well, so I don't need to live in the next life. I've said everything. There's no need to silence me. The foreign barbarian pavilion is in the east of the city. You knock me out and throw me into the alley." Bang! Before John Kai finished speaking, Su Buring slapped him on the back of the head, tilted his head and fainted again on the spot. Kui Zioan glanced down and looked slightly disgusted. "You are so cowardly. We are all princes, so far from you. That's natural." Su Buletinling smiled softly, gagged John Kai's mouth again, and tied it tighter. After confirming that he could not break free within a few days, he turned around and left the room with Xiao Wan. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 802. There are many small tribes in Mobei. When they come to Liangcheng for communication, they are placed in the Foreign Barbarians Hall. Like the 4 Barbarians Hall in Chang'an City, they are all built in areas where foreign tribes gather. Although the name is not very nice, as a place to receive foreign guests, The architecture of the foreign barbarians' hall shows the demeanor of a great country. It stands out among a bunch of houses and can be seen from 2 streets away. Leaving the prosperous Yangji Street, Liangcheng shows the emptiness and loneliness of Mobei. There are few pedestrians on the street, and only the occasional neighing of mules and horses can be heard. Su Buling drove the carriage and walked slowly from the alley to the vicinity of the foreign barbarians' hall. He first found an inn on the street to stay, let the little sparrow scout the surrounding area, and then came to the wall of the foreign barbarians' hall alone with a straight knife. In the dead of night, a few voices could be heard in the foreigners' hall. This Mobei is so humming poor, it can't be compared with our Jiangnan. Yeah, the women's skin is very rough, I heard it's from the sun. Su Buling covered his face with a black veil, listened outside the wall, and after confirming the positions of all the light and dark sentries, he jumped onto the wall and took a look inside. There were not many people in the courtyard of the foreigners' hall. In addition to a few northern Qi soldiers standing guard, there were 5 or 6 people sitting in the middle of the courtyard, wearing daimyo-style armor, chatting around the brazier. There were many courtyards in the back for foreign guests to live in, and 2 of them were still lit. Su Buling only took a glance and confirmed that these soldiers wearing daimyo armor were not under the command of the 4 eastern kings. The biggest difference between northern Qi and daimyo is that northern Qi will never wear hair until the national humiliation is gone, because etiquette begins with correct clothing and hat, and wearing hair is considered a very barbaric and impolite behavior. Going out without tying hair feels like a woman going out without clothes. Although the soldiers in front of him have their hair tied up, tying hair is a technical job, not just tying it up casually. There are particular styles and the use of hairpins and hairbands. The Central Plains soldiers who are sent to foreign countries cannot make their hair rough, and the men of northern Qi have long hair since childhood, and obviously they will not deliberately learn this. After noticing these small details, Su Buling realized that this was a bait, but he did not retreat. The mantis stalks the cicada, and the oriole is behind. If he does not bite the bait first, northern Qi will not know that he is coming, and naturally will not bite his bait. After Su Buling glanced around, he entered the foreigner pavilion silently and came to the top of the courtyard with lights. From the window, he could see 2 men in daimyo official robes sitting opposite each other in front of the tea table playing chess. The bamboo curtain blocked their faces, so he couldn't see who was sitting there. Su Buling thought for a moment, then suddenly flew up from the house and rushed to the tea house like a falcon swooping down on a rabbit. He stepped on the wall along the way to gain leverage, and stepped on the snow on the wall. As a result, his feet slipped and he fell directly. Oh my God! The tea house was filled with incense, and Yan Huilin, the sword fairy of northern Qi, was sitting in front of the chess table, holding the white piece and stroking it gently, as if he was thinking for a long time, but his mind was highly concentrated, paying attention to the slightest movement around him. Respected as the sword immortal of northern Qi, Yan Huilin is naturally the best swordsman in northern Qi. He comes from Baiutai in Tianshan, which is the only sword school that can be on the stage except for the 3 major sword schools in the Central Plains. Baiutai was originally in Mount Tai, and had close contacts with the Zhang family of Daqi. It was more like an academy that trained top masters for the government, rather than a martial arts section. Daqi retreated to Mobei before the Jiazi year, and Baiutai naturally moved. Yan Huilin became famous very early, and his status in northern Qi was no less than that of the former Wudang god of killing Chen Daozai. However, with an official identity, he mostly acted in secret to help the court deal with some troubles, and his achievements in public were rare. The last time he became famous was when he fought against Chen Chong, the gun god of the northern frontier, and they tied. He was selected as one of the top 10 martial arts champions in the world, and he was also the only martial arts champion outside the borders of Daewoo. The top 2 or 3 people in the martial arts world, such as Jie Gonggong, Li Hanzhong, and Zhou Qingkaiu, were not listed among the martial arts champions, because ordinary people could not see their battle records at all, and those who saw them basically had no chance to tell about them alive. Without accurate battle records, there was no way to determine who was better, so the skills of these people were all a mystery. Yan Huilin was definitely not as good as Zhou Qingkaiu, the national teacher, but he was able to use his shorthand to hit the longhand and tie with Chen Chong, the northern frontier gun god known for his fierceness and domineering. In today's martial arts world, he was also an absolute hero. However, Yan Huilin also knew that he was entrusted with an important task and sat here as bait. It was good that Su Buling did not come to Baiki. If he really came, Su Buling could beat down a circle of martial arts champions in the Central Plains, and it would not be difficult to add him. In order to prevent being swallowed by fish as bait, Yan Huilin was also in front of Shi Jinhai, the owner of the Baiki Royal Boxing Hall. Shi Jinhai is a generation older than Yan Huilin, his temples are already gray, but he looks more energetic than Yan Huilin. Northern Qi has dominated the Central Plains for 300 years, so its foundation is definitely not bad. In terms of martial arts attainments, it is not inferior to Dayo at all, but the population is too small after all. Martial artists are like panning for gold in the sand. The base is too small, so there are naturally few top martial artists. At present, the number of famous masters in Northern Qi is only a handful. Although there are not many, the advantage of Northern Qi martial artists is to strive for excellence. Zhou words that the martial arts champions of De Qi in the past all crawled out of the mountains of corpses and seas of blood are not empty words. Northern Qi does not have Tang Jiao and Zhang Buhan, who are just filling in the numbers of official families. None of the famous ones are mediocre, and Shi Jinhai is the same. Shi Jinhai is good at leg techniques. The whip kick technique dragon swinging tail used by Su Buling was created by Shi Jinhai. It is rumored that he can kick off a huge tree with one leg. However, his opponent was Su Buling, and Shi Jinhai, who was already past his prime, was obviously a bit cautious. As the saying goes, boxing is afraid of young people. Su Buling became a harvester of Wu Kuei in the Central Plains, and even single-handedly killed Lao Yi and Song Ying. Even if Shi Jinhai had Yan Huilin as a helper, he was not sure about his chances of winning. Fortunately, their mission was just to pretend to be envoys and wait for Su Buling to take the bait. As long as they were sure that Su Buling had come to Northern Qi, they didn't expect to capture Su Buling alive. If they couldn't defeat him, they could still run away. Shi Jinhai held the black pieces and looked at the chessboard, while his ears also paid attention to the surrounding disturbances. I'm not sure if Su Buletinling will come, and I don't know when he will come. It's really boring to sit and wait like this. Seeing that the night was getting dark, Shi Jinhai was about to follow the agreed words and say, "Master Han, the night is getting dark, let's fight tomorrow," but before the words came out, both of their faces were condensed, and they looked outside the bead curtain in a blink of an eye. Courtyard. Under the silvery moon, a black shadow soared into the sky from the wall. His movement was so sharp that he had never seen it before, but he reached the top of the wall in the blink of an eye. The speed was so fast that Shi Jinhai felt a little nervous. Yan Huilin's face was solemn, knowing that a fierce battle was inevitable, and he touched the hilt of the sword under the chess table with his right hand. Unfortunately, before the sword was unsheathed, he saw the murderous black figure stepping on the snow on the wall. His feet slipped and he fell directly to the outside of the wall. "Oh, I'll go." Cries of surprise followed. The two top military leaders of Northern Qi were both stunned. They thought it was some unprecedented move, and they all mustered up their energy to pay attention to their surroundings. It's just that the black shadow that slipped on the ground didn't use any extremely lethal moves after falling off the wall. Instead, it rose up again and flew away in the direction it came from, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Shi Jinhai sat in front of the chess case, his eyes slightly blank. Yan Huilin was also a little confused, but he quickly came to his senses. Living in an unfamiliar environment and at night, no matter how powerful the master is, it is impossible for him to go through life without making the slightest mistake, not to mention that Su Buling is only a young man in his early 20s, so slipping is not uncommon. A mistake during the surprise assassination had already given the opponent a chance to react. It would be too risky to force forward again. Su Buling was trying to escape. From his sudden action, Yan Huilin was already 80% sure that the person coming was Su Buling, and he immediately wanted to get up and chase him. But Grandmaster Wu Kuei ran away with all his strength. If he was too slow, he would never be able to catch up. Shi Jinhai thought for a moment and raised his hand to stop Yan Huilin. If we can't catch up, or if we chase them out, we will be exposed as bait here. Report it to the Imperial Advisor first. If Su Buledinling misses this time, he will definitely find another opportunity to attack the envoy team, and then the overall situation will be laid out. It's much better to ask you to go into the urn than to pursue it. Yan Huilin thought about it. All they had to do was make sure that Su Buling came to Northern Qi. To close the net, they would naturally have to use all their strength to ensure that they could catch Su Buling 100%. Thinking of this, Yan Huilin released the hilt of his sword, stood up, and quickly returned to the house to take out the carrier pigeon. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 803. The night is sinking like water. On the first floor of the inn, traders from foreign countries outside the Great Wall are holding hyukins and playing exotic tunes. The little sparrow stood on the windowsill with a few melon seeds at his feet, listening to a little tune and keeping watch seriously. In front of the window along the street, Kui Zioan held her face in her hands, stroking the small mahogany sign in her hand, sitting slightly lazily. The room was quite warm. Having stayed in the bitterly cold place of Yuzhu all year round, Kui Zioan was not afraid of the cold. The red fox fur hung in the corner of the room, and she was wearing a lavender winter skirt. She stayed alone without lighting the lamp, and the silver moonlight fell into the window. Inside, her eyes flickered with the starlight, her fair cheeks were hazy, and her waist was like a willow's waist outlining its slender curves in the night. The foreign barbarian pavilion is far away. Su Buling just left, and he doesn't know how long it will take to come back. Kui Zioan waited for a while and felt a little bored. She took off the window stay and went to the first floor of the inn. She asked the store owner to bring a few buckets of water up and poured it into the wooden bucket behind the screen. Water mist evaporated from the wooden barrel. Kui Zioan took out the medicine prepared by Zhongli Jiju from her luggage and poured it into the tub. A faint scent of medicine filled the room. The little sparrow stood on the screen and chirped twice, probably saying, "Lao Su will be back soon, don't seduce others." It's a pity that Kui Zioan couldn't understand the birdsong, so she untied her winter skirt, revealing her light green belly band and thin pants, and turned her head to look at the little sparrow. "Do you want to join us?" The little sparrow obviously didn't want to be a drowned bird, so it jumped farther away to avoid being dragged into the bath by the silly woman. Kui Zioan smiled softly, untied the string of her belly band, revealing two white balls that looked like upside-down jade bowls. She hung the belly band on the screen, then pulled down her white silk pants and stepped into the tub. Wow! The sound of water splashing sounded from the room, accompanied by the woman's clear and low humming. "Lanji and Feng Shaka General, please drink less." After singing a few lines of the song, a little noise started to sound in the night. "There are assassins." "Where?" Kui Zioan stopped humming and listened carefully. It was the sound coming from the foreign pavilion. There seemed to be soldiers wearing armor running on the street. Soon, there was a soft sound in the room, and someone came in. Kui Zioan blinked her eyes, and when she saw the little sparrow looking at her with a gloating expression, she knew that Su Buling was back and asked, "Why are you back so soon?" As he spoke, he shrank a little deeper into the water and raised his hand to grab the belly band that was placed on the screen. Su Buling climbed down from the eaves, opened the window and entered the room. As soon as he landed, he noticed some water mist in the room, and the sound of splashing came from behind the screen. Su Buletinling paused and was thinking about whether to go out when Kui Zioen's voice came. He had to pull down the black gauze on his face and said with a smile, "The news has been released. Just wait and see what happens next." "Well, I'll go out first." Before Su Buletinling finished speaking, he saw the little sparrow standing on the screen. It was quite difficult to grab the tether of the belly band with its claws and fly towards the side. The fabric of the belly band is light and not heavy, but the volume is a bit big compared to a small sparrow. It flies up and down crookedly. Kui Zioen's slightly annoyed voice came from behind. Yi, what are you doing?" The little sparrow knew Su Buling's hobby of collecting and hovered in front of Su Buling. It flapped its little wings and made ripples in its belly band. It chirped twice, as if to say, take it, you're welcome." Su Buling was a little amused and said, "Yi, don't be ridiculous." Then he took the belly band, secretly kissed the little sparrow, and said with his eyes, "The bird is so good." Behind the screen, Kui Zioen's cheeks were red, and she didn't know whether it was from taking a bath or something else. She huddled in the water and said crisply, "I was taking a shower. Why didn't you knock on the door when you came back?" "Didn't pay attention." Su Buling explained softly, without any intention of going in to help rub his back. He sat down at the table and took off his gloves, soft armor, etc. Traveling thousands of miles these days, the two of them often stayed in inns. In the past, Su Buletinling always waited outside to take a shower, but this was the first time they did so inside. Seeing that Su Buling had no intention of going out, Kui Zioen thought for a while and said nothing more. She continued to scrub her body, but her movements were obviously much smaller, and she tried not to make any noise. The room was very quiet. There was a screen between the two of them, and neither of them spoke, which made the atmosphere a bit weird. Su Buling peeled the melon seeds for the little sparrow and waited for a moment. The sound of water rushing came from behind the screen. The winter skirt on the screen was pulled off. Then Kui Zioen tied the belt around her waist and walked away from behind. "Come out." Just out of the bath, Kui Zioen's face was still flushed, and she smelled a little bit of water. Because she was not restrained by her belly band when she walked to the table with a trembling and moving rhythm, stretched out her palms towards the little sparrow, and looked at her. Slightly fierce. "Give it back to me. Otherwise, I'll eat Bai Zhang tonight." Yi, who was immersed in eating melon seeds, felt confident and just pretended not to hear. Su Buling naturally defended her shortcomings, picked up Yi and touched her head. "The little bird is ignorant, why bother with it?" Kui Zioen was not arguing with the little sparrow, so she could just ask Su Buling directly. When she saw that the promise was not given, she stopped saying anything. She sat down at the table, raised her hair beside her ears, and glanced at the bed inside. "Are you going out of town tonight? You shouldn't go out in the next 2 days. Let's check the situation first. We've just opened a room. Are you going to sleep on the stool or with Auntie?" In the past, for safety and care, the two of them also slept in the same room. Su Buling slept on a stool, Kui Zioen lay down. Su Buling was confessed by Zioen at Hula High during the day, and now he definitely wants to sleep on the bed, but Zioen's body is still very weak. Even if she can walk, she can't stand too much tossing. Su Buling hesitated, smiled, and said, "You rest assured, I can sleep on the stool." Kui Zioen glanced at Su Buling, knowing what Su Buling was thinking, and snorted softly. "My illness is not healed yet, you can hold me to sleep, just like holding your mother. It's not necessary to do that, a man, and has to speak first." Su Buling slightly spread his hands. Why do you always call yourself aunt, making me look like a loser who has no moral principles? He stood up while speaking, put his arm through Kui Zioan's knees, and held her back with the other hand, and hugged her. Kui Zioan seemed to be born without too many emotions, only likes and dislikes. She kept away from things she didn't like, and never concealed things she liked, so everything was written on her face. She leaned on Su Buling's arm, her voice still a bit childish. I saw it a long time ago. He. Su Buling raised the corner of his mouth and smiled, and didn't force an explanation. He walked to the bed, put Kui Zioan on the inside of the bed, covered her with a quilt, and then lay on the outside, with the little sparrow squatting between their cheeks. Russell. Kui Zioan didn't have the habit of sleeping in a skirt. After lying in the quilt, she pulled the skirt out from under the quilt and handed it to Su Buling. Su Buling blinked, took the skirt, put it on the table at the head of the bed, and glanced at it sideways, but unfortunately the quilt was covered tightly and he couldn't see anything. Kui Zioan was calmer than Su Buling. She lay down comfortably and closed her eyes. Yesterday you talked about Wu Gang picked Osman Thus flowers to make mooncakes, and Marshal Tianpeng ate them secretly. Keep making it up. Su Buling was a little confused and thought for a while. Well, can I tell it with a clear conscience? Well? It's up to you, it's a story anyway, and it can't be true with a clear conscience. Okay. After a while. Old Su, what's the point of telling your aunt with a clear conscience? It's said that Marshal Tianpeng entered the Moon Palace in the middle of the night. Outside the window, the night was long and silent, the lights were off, the stars were brighter, and the moonlight was like water sprinkled between the majestic cities in Mobei. Unconsciously, there were no words, only two steady and peaceful breaths. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 804. Today, I will tell you about Su Buling, Prince Su's son, who bullied men and women, and forced good men to become wives. On the winter solstice of Dao Zheahong's 10th year, Chang'an City ushered in a light snowfall. Near the turret of Fangxi, Golan gambling houses are spread out one after another. Rogue idlers gather around the tea stalls with braziers at their feet. The storyteller spoke of lotus flowers and told a rare incident that happened at the border. The last letter said that I, Su Buling, the eldest son of King Su, went into Mobei alone with a horse and a spear, beheaded hundreds of people and returned without any injuries. I was called Little King of Hell by the border army generals. Guess what? How old was Prince Su? How do we, ordinary people, know about the prince's affairs? Say it quickly. A group of audience members were anxiously waiting for the main scene of bullying men and dominating women. The storyteller gave it up for a while before he spoke enthusiastically. Prince Su had just turned 16 on the day he returned home from carrying thieves single-handedly. 16 years old. How is that possible? Everyone was in an uproar, not believing it. The storyteller shook his folding fan in the winter and said leisurely. This matter shocked the court at the time, and even the Holy Emperor was alarmed. All the officials said that Prince Su was a young man who excelled in generals. Given time, his achievements will be no less than that of King Sulai. General Su has a different surname than Wang. Crown Prince Su is more powerful than General Su. What official should I be granted? One level older than the prince, naturally. The storyteller's face froze, and he quickly raised his hand to suppress the noise. Don't answer nonsense, do you want to die? As the saying goes, if a tree is beautiful in the forest, the wind will destroy it. The storyteller was eloquent and the tea drinkers listened with gusto. This scene was not uncommon in the markets of Chang'an City. Just as everyone was getting into the mood, a burst of noise suddenly sounded from the street. If you don't eat the toast, you will be fined with wine. Hit me. The guests in the tea stall turned around and saw a female detective with a wild goose feather knife being chased by a dozen thugs carrying sticks. Although dragons and snakes are mixed in the wells of Chang'an City, beatings of officials are not common, causing many people to look around. Soon, 3 Imperial Guardsmen ran over, led by a young commander. They were far away and said loudly, "Private fights are strictly prohibited in the capital, so who is acting recklessly here?" The female detective was in a state of embarrassment. "Sir, they dared to beat the officers in the street. There must be something weird hidden in this restaurant." The commander did not run to question the thugs, but looked at the female detective coldly. "This is not your place. If nothing happens again, don't blame me for being unkind." Typical of being biased, the onlookers were shaking their heads. There was a backer behind the hook of Dafang gambling house. This little catcher was obviously new here. The female detective's eyes were full of astonishment. "You turned a blind eye when you beat the officer. You knew there was something strange in the restaurant, but you didn't even check it when you walked to the door. Could it be that Your Excellency has a relationship with the owner of this restaurant?" The commander's face was gloomy. "Get it for me, and let their chief officer come and lead the people. Promise." After 3 words of no response, the Imperial Forest Army came forward to take the person with an anklet in hand. The female detective's face turned livid with anger. "How dare you? I'm from the Criminal Investigation Department, why do you arrest me?" As he spoke, he drew his sword and stood in front of him in a posture. When everyone saw this, they secretly thought that something was wrong. As the saying goes, a high-ranking official would crush a person to death. This catcher must be a new chick. There is no reason to use a knife in other people's territory. Sure enough, when the commander saw that the female detective still dared to resist, he said angrily, "You are so brave. Not only did you disobey, but you also pointed your knife at the officer. Let me take him down." Seeing the situation, the 2 forest guards encircled and came forward. The back of their swords slammed into the crook of the female catcher's leg, knocking her to her knees. The other person threw a lasso over her body and yanked her back. The female detective's face turned red and her eyes were bloodshot, and she cursed angrily, "You are a bitch, you are colluding with businessmen and government to confuse right and wrong. I will definitely report it to the Criminal Investigation Department when I go back. Hum your mother hummer." The commander's eyes were cold. He strode forward and slapped the female agent on the face. "It's so powerful and heavy that if it hits your face, you'll definitely lose a few teeth." The tea guests who were watching all frowned, but they were not qualified to interfere in official affairs. However, this slap did not hit the female detective's face. Everyone turned around and saw that a young man in white had appeared in front of the female detective. Instead of a jade pendant, there was a wine gourd hanging on his waist. He held a long sword in his right hand and grabbed the commander's wrist guard with his left hand, motionless. The young man in white has sword-like eyebrows and a pair of peach blossom eyes that are inherently aristocratic. They are quite attractive upon closer inspection. He looks like he has stepped out of a painting. He looks like a nosy wanderer. When the commander saw someone suddenly running over to stop him, his face darkened and he said angrily, "The yamen is doing business, and everyone else is waiting to get out of the way." The young man in white had a dull expression. "We all eat from the official family, why are we facing each other with swords and swords against Pao Zi?" The commander twitched his hand again, but before he could pull it away, he said loudly, "The bold thief dared to carry out armed attacks on the street and attack officials." As he spoke, he drew his sword with his left hand and struck the young man in white. The 2 forest guards released the rope and approached at the same time. The people watching were all anxious. If there was a conflict between ordinary people and officers and soldiers, they deserved to be beaten to death. This kid in white clothes was too impulsive. Didn't bringing weapons give others an excuse? The female catcher's eyes were full of anxiety, and she was just trying to tell this bold rich man to stay out of his own business, but she never thought that a cold light suddenly flashed in front of her eyes. The leader struck out with his sword, and the chill in his heart went straight to his bones. He wanted to raise his sword to block, but it was too late. Wipe! The long sword in the hand of the young man in white came first, swept it in front of the commander, and retracted the scabbard cleanly. In a glimpse, 4 words can be seen engraved on the blade. Act without orders. Sue Bewlings without orders. Blood flew, leaving a curtain of blood beads in the air. The 2 imperial guards were as if they were facing a great enemy, but it was too late when they realized that something was wrong. The commander was tense, his official sword fell to the ground, his hands covered his throat, blood flowed between his fingers, his eyeballs almost popped out of his eye sockets, staring at the young man in white in disbelief, staggered back a few steps and fell to the ground, blood seeping into the cracks of the bluestone floor. A sword to the throat. On the back street, there was a moment of silence. The ruffians watching from a distance were all pale and frightened and stunned on the spot. There are many cases of gangs fighting and killing people underground in Chang'an City, but on the surface, they still have to abide by the law. Those who dare to kill people in the street will basically be executed in the autumn. No one in Chang'an City dares to kill officials in the street. This is under the feet of the emperor. A few drops of blood splashed on the face of the female detective. Looking at the lifeless leader of the Imperial Guards after a few twitches, her face was pale and she didn't come back to her senses for a long time. I didn't see how the young man in white pulled out the sword just now. Did the leader of the Imperial Guards die like this? The young man in white put away his long sword and looked at the 2 stunned Imperial Guards next to him. The 2 Imperial Guards were so scared that their hearts and galls broke. They slowly retreated with knives in their hands. You are so brave, under the feet of the emperor, you dare to kill the leader of the Imperial Guards in the street. Get cash red envelope. You can get cash by reading books. Follow the WeChat public account Book Friends Base Camp, cash/points are waiting for you. Trembling, he went into the alley next to him while talking. In a moment, several communication fireworks rose. Ah! A scream came from an unknown brothel. The back street was in chaos, and the dozen thugs outside the restaurant were at a loss. The female detective stared at the corpse for a long time, until the young man in white reached out his hand to support her. She came back to her senses, and suddenly turned over, anxious and angry. How can you kill people? Killing officials is equivalent to rebellion. The young man in white glanced at the corpse. Officials and businessmen collude, condone, and shelter, attack comrades. Any one of these is enough to kill him, not to mention using a knife on me. The female detective was already panicking, looking at the young man in white who she didn't know at all, and said anxiously, "No matter how serious the crime is, it must be judged and punished by the 3 courts before it can be executed. You are so impulsive, how will it end?" The young man in white did not answer, holding a sword, and walked towards the restaurant. The thugs in the restaurant were as if they were facing a great enemy. The other party had killed the official and became a thief. If they killed more people, they would help the government catch the thieves. The thug leader's eyes turned cold, and 2 short knives slipped out of his sleeves, attacking the white-clothed young man's chest one after the other. Before the female detective said be careful, she saw the white-clothed young man stepping on the steps, and there was a crisp sound of pop. The stone slab showed cracks, and the white-clothed young man was like a tiger pouncing on its prey. Almost in the blink of an eye, he hit the thugs in the restaurant in mid-air, with his knees on his chest. Bang! Bone fracture and chest sunken. Before the thug leader could react, 2 pits appeared on his chest, and the back of his short-clothed tights was torn suddenly. With a crash, broken wood flew across. The thug was knocked back and smashed the door behind him, and stopped only after smashing the square table in the restaurant. The young man in white kept his knees on the leader's chest, and the 5 fingers of his left hand clamped the thug's neck like a hook. Without waiting for the thug to make a sound, he slightly exerted force with his fingers, and there was a crisp sound of click. Blood oozes out of the thug's mouth, and after two sounds, the hands that grabbed the young man in white's arms fell to the ground powerlessly. The female detective saw the scene and was horrified. It would take decades of hard training to achieve such skills. This young man in white is about less than 20 years old. Is he a human? Kill people. At this time, screams were heard on the street. The dozen or so hooligans who were watching were already scared out of their wits and fled in panic. The female detective was already confused, holding the goose feather knife, at a loss, and quickly chased to the restaurant. Are you crazy? How can you be so bold and presumptuous, killing two people in a row? Even if you are the king of heaven, there is no way to end it peacefully today. When the young man in white heard this, his eyes were slightly defiant. Even the king of heaven has to listen to me. The words were arrogant, but true. Because this extremely domineering young man in white is the little king of hell bubbling in the storyteller's mouth, the eldest son of the only king of a different surname in Daewoo dynasty, and a time traveler who started with 2 kings and 4 twos. However, to explain why this murder happened, we have to start from this morning. The new book is launched, and the long journey begins again. Please collect and recommend. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 805. The cold wind is like a knife and the heavy snow is like a mat. The monk in cassock, with his right arm exposed, chanted the Buddha's name, and walked slowly through the frozen snowfield by the North Sea. Where Bihai is known only to a few officials who drew geographical maps in Daewoo. Ordinary literati may never have heard of this place in their lives because it is too far away. Mobai is called the wilderness beyond the Great Wall by the Central Plains, while Bihai is the wilderness beyond the Great Wall. It is 3,000 miles away from Ningguoguan, no less than the distance from Taiyuan to the capital of South Vietnam. Thousands of years ago, the area near Bihai was deserted. It was only after the Qi dynasty retreated to the grassland during the Jiazi period that there were some traces of human activity in this place. The purpose of coming to this place is not to live. This bitter and cold place is where northern Qi exiled its prisoners. However, the monks walking by the North Sea are not prisoners, nor are they simple monks. They are just monks who have become monks on the way and are here to deliver a letter. The monk was born in a barbaric land in the western region where people cannibalize. His hands were stained with blood and he committed countless sins. After being enlightened by an expert, he entered Buddhism to meditate and atone for his past evil deeds. If a warrior who has emerged from the killings can put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot, what will happen to the innocent people who were killed? After realizing that this road was impassable, the monk took up the butcher's knife again, but belief in Buddhism still had some effect. Nowadays, the monks are not merciless when killing people, and they are still dedicated to good deeds on weekdays, so they are called half-faced Buddha. There was heavy snowfall by the North Sea, and the half-faced Buddha walked through the boundless snowfield, seemingly slowly and sometimes quickly, but within a moment, he arrived near a tent. The tent was pitched by the North Sea. A white-haired shepherd sat alone by the North Sea, surrounded by a group of sheep, rummaging for hay in the snow. The half-faced Buddha walked up to the shepherd, raised his hand and chanted the Buddha's name. My Buddha is merciful. It has been decades, and the national preceptor has not given up yet. There is only one national master position in northern Qi, and the white-haired shepherd in front of him is obviously not Zhou Kaiu. The shepherd didn't seem to have a good impression of the half-faced Buddha, so he said hoarsely, "You bald donkey, you're not dead yet." The half-faced Buddha had a kind-hearted look and didn't mind the shepherd's cold treatment, and said with a smile, "The poor monk wants to see the Buddha, but the Buddha doesn't want to see me." Snort. The shepherd has obviously been in a high position for a long time. Even if he has been exiled in a bitter cold land for 20 years, he still can't change his spirit of having the world at his fingertips. Looking at the boundless North Sea, he said coldly. King Kaiu asked you to come? What trouble happened? The half-faced Buddha sat cross-legged beside the shepherd, took out a letter from his arms and handed it over. There is a genius from the Central Plains. His talent and understanding are so high that he has never been seen before or since. According to the calculation of the 300-year cycle, it is possible that the god of war Zhozhe will be reincarnated first, and your son may not be able to defeat him. The shepherd took the envelope and said calmly. There is no such thing as reincarnation in the world. There is no such thing as human beings and heaven. In a world of great strife, it is not surprising that any kind of genius will appear. The half-faced Buddha was non-committal and raised his eyes to look at the sky. Some poor monks outside the world know it, but whether there is a heaven outside this world has never been revealed. Can the master of the country know it? The shepherd snorted lightly and did not answer. The envelope was unfolded, and it was Zhou King Kaiu's handwritten letter, which contained his prediction and countermeasures for the situation. After looking at it for a few times, the shepherd said softly. Su Buletin Ling, is this Su Yu's son? The half-faced Buddha nodded. Yes, I went to Suzhou once and wanted to recruit a disciple, but unfortunately I was kicked out as a deceitful demon monk. The shepherd was silent for a moment. Let's go and have a look. The cold wind blew across the snowfield again, and the sheep were still wandering near the tent. There was only one futon left by the North Sea, and no one left. At noon, Kaiyuefeng town has the most intensive traffic of merchants. All 3 religions and 9 streams are entrenched in the streets, greeting merchants coming in and out. With the 6 escorts in the town gone without return, the charlatans in the town also calmed down a little, and even spoke with a little more patience. At the southern intersection, Chen Xining led the horse and entered slowly, searching the town to see if he could find any clues about Su Buling. Zhu Manzi carried a long sword across his back and a bamboo hat. He was in great spirits at this time. Although it was his first time here, he was still explaining carefully along the way. Kaiyuefeng town Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is the most complicated place in the world. When I was working as a wolf guard in Tianzi camp, I often heard spies talking about this place. Many of the Jiazi bandits in Daya were chased by us. If you are desperate, you will escape and hide here. Even if you think this town is ordinary, in fact, everyone is not ordinary. Maybe that bun seller over there is a generation of tycoons who once dominated the martial arts world. Chen Xining turned to look at the vendor selling meat buns on the street. He had a beard and a knife behind his waist. He looked a bit gangster, but judging from the subtle joint movements, he was at most a gangster who had practiced the moves for 2 or 3 years. At the moment shaked his head. I can't believe what the storyteller said. Before I came to the Central Plains, I thought that the Central Plains Wukui were everywhere and there were as many masters as dogs. But when I walked from Lingnan to Mobei, I didn't meet many who could fight. Chen Xining's words were not bragging. Grandmaster means qualified to establish a section. There are only so many people in the world, and there are even fewer who are in their prime. Don't look at Tang Jiao being jokingly called the shame of Wukuei by the Jianghu people. It's really ridiculous. In the arena, from Nanyu to Mobei, few people could stop him, and the same was true for Chen Xining. Zhu Manzi was slightly younger than Chen Xining, but his martial arts skills were directly inferior to Ning Qingyi's. Naturally, he felt a little jealous. At this time, he said seriously. Old Chen, I know that you are skilled in martial arts, but a martial artist must guard against arrogance, impetuosity, and calmness. Even if he is as invincible as Mr. Su, he must have a normal mind, otherwise, his sharpness will be too strong, and there will be murderous intent. If there is murderous intent, there will be flaws. Even my father couldn't completely calm his mind. Chen Xining nodded thoughtfully. You are not very skilled in martial arts, but you know a lot of principles. Can I teach you? Zhu Manzi frowned. Don't underestimate me, do you know, eunuch Chia? A person more powerful than Mr. Su, when I was fishing with him, he taught me this truth. I don't teach it to ordinary people. Chen Shining smiled softly. Eunuch Chia is a great man of his generation, I know that, but that kind of fairy-like figure will also accompany you to fish for tortoises. Not enough words to speculate. Zhu Manzi puffed up his cheeks and didn't want to talk to Chen Shining anymore. He glanced at the street in a blink of an eye, looking for a restaurant to have a good meal. He never expected to see a girl sitting behind a table telling fortunes at a tea shop in the middle of the street. In winter, the sun is shining warmly and the weather is very good. The girl in a small coat has long hair shawl, supports her chin with both hands, and is shouting out of boredom. Calculate marriage, calculate good or bad luck. The girl has an oval face and a very elegant appearance. She looks like a young lady from a scholarly family. She is not very old and is slightly taller than Zhu Manzi. Zhu Manzi noticed this girl, not because she was younger or taller than her, because this was too normal. The main reason is because this little girl is very cleanly dressed and looks out of place compared to other people in Kaiyufen town. Chen Shining also noticed the girl outside the tea shop, glanced at her casually and looked away. In front of the tea shop, Xiao Dehua, who was sitting at the table in a daze, also saw the two people who were looking at her and sat up straighter. Sir, would you like to come over and count me out? Zhu Manzi just walked around and looked around, and joined in the fun when he encountered something interesting. Anyway, he was wandering on the street, so he stopped in front of the tea house, sat down in front of the fortune-telling stall, and said curiously. Young girl is not very old, but she can also tell fortunes. Is her fortune-telling accurate? Looking carefully while talking, Zhu Manzi suddenly felt that this girl looked familiar. When being a police officer, the first thing to remember is the appearance. Even if you just pass by her occasionally on the street or meet again in a special place, you will have an impression. Zhu Manzi took a closer look and felt that he had seen this little girl somewhere before, but when he thought about it carefully, he had no impression. It was the first time she came to Kaiyufen town. It was impossible that he met her in the town. After thinking about it carefully, it can only be regarded as an illusion. Xiao Dehua once passed Zhu Manzi and Neng Qingyi in Qingshi Lane of Chang'an City, but she didn't even notice Neng Qingyi. She must not have remembered Zhu Manzi. At this time, she asked seriously. If you know how to calculate, it's accurate if you believe it. If you don't believe it, it's not accurate. What does the girl want to calculate? Zhu Manzi nodded slightly, thought about it, and said a little embarrassedly. Count it as a marriage. Xiao Dehua knows how to calculate marriage, and she can only calculate marriage. She pushed the lottery tube in front of Zhu Manzi and motioned for the lottery. Zhu Manzi was still a little nervous, so he took a deep breath, then picked up the lottery tube and shook it twice in a decent manner. Soon, a bamboo stick fell out and wrote. In the spring breeze, the peach blossoms are fragrant, and the flowers fill the sky with pink light. Don't be impatient when eating flowers. I have some fresh peaches for you to taste. Little Peach Blossom's eyes lit up, and she was about to say, wow. It's signed. Zhu Manzi, who was sitting opposite, stood up first, shook the bamboo stick, and said with great surprise. Old Chen, I shook it and signed it. Look, look, look. Chen Shining just took a quick glance and saw that the lotus tube was full of signed invoices. She didn't mind this amusing trick and said with a smile. Yes, congratulations. Xiao Dehua was robbed of her words, so she could only turn around and say, it turns out that the girl can interpret the signature by herself. Zhu Manzi has been on the streets all year round, so he must be good at interpreting fortune tellers. Knowing that he had robbed the fortune teller, he humbly said. I just know a little bit, girl, please explain it to me carefully. Little Dehua was then satisfied and began to explain seriously. This lot focuses on the word "don't be impatient." Chen Xining saw two little girls sitting together and talking nonsense, so she didn't want to go in and join in the fun. She sat down at the table in the back and asked the waiter next to her to bring 2 cages of steamed buns. The kind-hearted old woman in the tea shop stood up at this moment, came over with a teapot, poured 2 bowls of tea, looked at the two of them, and said kindly, "Why did the girl come to this place? The place here is not stable. If there is nothing important, it is better to go home early." You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 806. The old woman has stayed in Kaiyufeng town for many years and knows the inside story of Kaiyufeng town. Every year, young people who don't know the heights of the world come over and most of them are left outside the town. Chen Xining and Zhu Manzi are both carrying weapons and they are not very old. They are obviously attracted by them. The old woman thought she was a little knight-errant who went out to make trouble. Knowing that the old woman was a kind reminder, Chen Xining raised her hand to take the tea bowl and smiled. "Thank you for your concern, auntie. I am sensible." Seeing this, the old woman said no more, put down the teapot, and sat back by the stove. Chen Xining took 2 sips of tea and saw that the old woman was kind and friendly, so she asked, "Auntie, have you seen a man passing by in a carriage in recent days? He must have been alone. I don't know the rest. Although the description is a bit sparse, it is enough in Kaiyufeng town, because few people walk alone in this place, especially those driving cars, most of which are accompanied by guards." When the old woman heard this description, she smiled and nodded. "There was one 2 days ago. He didn't stop in the town and went directly to Liangcheng." Chen Xining felt a little happy, knowing that she had found a clue to Su Buling, and thanked. "Thank you, auntie." The old woman nodded and said no more questions. Zhu Manzi finished calculating the marriage, took out the money with satisfaction, came to sit down at the table, and saw that there were no outsiders in the tea shop, only an old man and a young man. He was obviously a little curious about the identities of the 2 people, and said, "Old lady, I heard that there are no ordinary people in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon in Kaiyufeng town. Aren't you also an expert who hides from the world?" Little Dehua stood up from outside the tea shop, sat next to the old woman and warmed herself by the fire. Hearing this, she shook her head and said, "There are not so many masters in the world. Kaiyufeng town is full of petty thieves, and none of them can beat them. I advised Grandma to go home and stay. Grandma is used to living here and doesn't want to leave." "Oh." Zhu Manzi seemed to understand, but thought for a while and then said, "The old lady should know the fun places on the grassland, right? We came from Taiyuan, and this is our first time here. Taiyuan is now also under the rule of the Northern Qi dynasty, and there are quite a lot of merchants coming here, which is not unusual." The old woman thought about it for a moment and nodded slightly. "There are many places with beautiful scenery on the grassland, but I have gone to very few places. Except for Guiyan City, I only remember Hulun Lake on the easternmost grassland. It was the most beautiful place in my life. The most beautiful place I have ever seen, with abundant pasture and cattle and sheep everywhere. It is no worse than any other place in the world, but it is a bit far away and you have to go up from Liaodong, so you too may not be able to go." Chen Xining is a princess of South Vietnam, so she naturally knows something about the geography of the 3 kingdoms. When she heard these words, she nodded slightly. "I heard it's quite beautiful. The Tuba royal court on the grassland used to be there. It seemed that it took Daki's cavalry to regain that place for decades. Now it's Daki's horse farm. This is not a secret. After all, There are only a few places in northern Qi that produce high-quality war horses. The old woman looked very calm, thought about it, and said with a smile. Yes, speaking of it, the court's behavior in this matter is a bit unkind. When Xiaodahua heard this, she was stunned for a moment and said, Grandma, how do you say this? Let the court know that you will be beheaded. The old woman was called Grandma by the little peach blossom, and she was obviously not afraid of beheading. When she saw several little girls sitting in front of her, she might be too old and wanted to chat, she shook her head and said softly. It is not benevolent and righteous. At that time, the Chanyu of Tuoba Palace had no intention of fighting with Daki. For decades, he paid tribute every year without offending Daki. Daki was aggressive and demanded every year. The number of war horses doubled, and the Tuoba royal court could no longer hold on. One year, when they did not have enough horses, the Qi dynasty prepared to send troops on the grounds of contempt for the sect leader. Chen Shining feels the same way about this kind of thing. Between big and small countries, the big fish eats the small fish. The weaker party only has the fate of being bullied and exploited. This is the case even in South Vietnam. They are squeezed by the big U every year and still have to keep smiling. For fear that Dayo would find an excuse to send troops to attack, in this case, Su Buling still found an excuse to lead troops to remove South Vietnam. Although the northern Qi dynasty was weaker than the Great Yu, it would be a wild tiger on the grassland. It would be as easy to kill Tuoba royal court, which only had more than 100,000 herdsmen, as to crush an ant to death. Chen Shining thought for a moment and asked, then Daki used this name to send troops to Tuoba royal court? The old woman shook her head, not yet. At that time, King Tuoba knew that something was wrong, so he tried every means to fill the vacancies of war horses with cattle and sheep, so as to avoid military disasters. In order to prevent the Qi from being angered again, he sent Chan Yu's daughter, Tuobaling, the most beautiful flower by Hulun Lake, went to Guiyan City. In order to protect the people of the clan, Tuobaling originally wanted to enter the palace and become the concubine of Emperor Qi. However, in Guiyan City, she first met a prince's son. The two fell in love at first sight. The prince's son also had some status, so he promised at that time that with him one day, the Tuoba clan will not die out. Tuobaling believed it and married that prince's son. When Chen Shining heard this, her heart trembled slightly. After all, what the old woman said was somewhat similar to what she was currently experiencing. Chen Shining hesitated and asked, "What's the result?" Zhu Manzi listened while holding the meat buns in his hands. Hearing this, he shook his head and said, "What else could the outcome be? Don't you know that the royal court is gone? It must be that prince's son who broke his promise." The old woman shook her head and sighed, "It doesn't count as breaking one's word. National affairs have nothing to do with children's personal relationships. No matter how good the promise is, it is in vain. Tuoba royal court occupies the most fertile grassland and does not have enough troops to defend it. As long as the northern Qi dynasty had a need and it was inevitable to conquer that grassland. At that time, it was the son of the prince who led the army. The reason was that state affairs were of paramount importance and he had to do it." Chen Shining frowned slightly when she heard this, because what the old woman said was very reasonable. As long as necessary, even if she married Su Buling, for the sake of the country, the Chen family should be eradicated. As the person in power, Su Buling, I'm afraid he won't be lenient at all. But if she didn't marry Su Buling, Chen wouldn't even have this slim sense of security, so what could she do? Zhu Manzi was smart and knew that Chen Shining had taken this incident as a warning, so he quickly said, "Haha. It's been a long time, so don't mention it. Eat steamed buns, and you have to rush after eating them." Chen Shining pursed her lips and smiled, without further chatting. She turned around and ate the steamed buns in small bites. After eating, she and Manzi got on their horses and headed towards Liangcheng. Little Dehua sat by the stove. After the two of them walked away, she looked at the old woman and whispered, "Grandma, it seems like this is the first time you say this." "It's an old story, I just remembered it." The old woman smiled kindly, said nothing more, and just glanced at the far north. "There are many people passing by Kaiyufen town every day. Maybe, as Chen Shining said, there are not many who can fight, but the people who can walk here are definitely not ordinary traffickers and pawns." Zhou Qingkaiu has already learned the news that Su Buling has come to northern Qi. As Kaiyufen town is the only place he must pass when leaving customs, it is impossible not to set up an informant. Zhu Manzi and Chen Shining rode horses through the long street of the town, heading towards Liangcheng from the northern intersection. In a gambling stall on the street, a boy was sunbathing at the door. He stood up and walked to the fence of the liquor store next door. His eyes pointed at the two figures who were about to disappear. These two are women disguised as men. They don't look like the people mentioned above. It's too unexpected for two women to come to Kaiyufen town. Although the two horses are covered up, they are obviously good horses. I'm afraid their identities are unusual. Do you want to check one time? The shopkeeper of the wine shop is a hidden stake of the Northern Qi Imperial Boxing Hall buried in Kaiyufen town. Like the Criminal Investigation Department, the Imperial Boxing Hall is an intelligence agency and a violence agency of the Imperial Court, and their powers are almost the same. The old shopkeeper also noticed the two outsiders passing by, thought for a moment, nodded and said, "I'm afraid it's a ranger from the pass. Just send someone to find out the identity. As long as it has nothing to do with that person, don't pay too much attention." The boy nodded, turned around and retreated. A moment later, a homing pigeon flew from behind the gambling stall to Liangcheng in the north. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 807. It was just dawn. Soldiers were patrolling back and forth on the streets of Liangcheng, and the sound of armor rubbing against each other came into the room. Between the curtains, Su Buling opened his eyes and tilted his head to look. Kui Zioan was leaning on his arms, still sleeping soundly with her head resting on her arms. It was cold in the cold winter, and the quilt was very thick. Kui Zioan almost buried her face under the quilt, her hair pressed against his chin, curled up like a kitten. The little sparrow huddled in Kui Zioan's arms. Su Buling still held most of his conscience in his hand, and the warm touch was very good, but since she was touched without a belly band on the first night, Kui Zioan had been wearing a close-fitting small dress, and his hand was still rubbing the fabric. As Su Buling's hands moved, Kui Zioan frowned, opened her eyes in a daze, looked down, and squeezed Su Buling with her shoulder, saying dissatisfiedly, "You're touching me again. We agreed not to move around and lie together, you're lying to me." Su Buling said this before going to bed, but after falling asleep, his hands and feet moved around and he couldn't control it. He still looked innocent at this time. He smiled softly, pulled his hands back, got up and tucked the quilt in. "It's still early, sleep a little longer. Yi, get up, the early bird catches the worm." "Bird? Are you a man?" The little sparrow was not happy with such blatant discrimination. He turned his chubby head and huddled into Kui Zioan's clothes, pretending not to hear anything. Su Buling still had to rely on the little sparrow to monitor the movements in the city. Seeing that the little sparrow could not get up, he had to reach into the quilt and take the little bird out of Kui Zioan's arms. Kui Zioan helped him, but fortunately he still took the little sparrow out. Su Buling held the reluctant little sparrow and came to the table to feed some bird food. After a few words, he threw the little sparrow out of the window. The sun had not yet risen, and the streets were covered with snow left over from last night. Except for patrol soldiers and breakfast vendors, there were almost no pedestrians. The little sparrow shivered with cold, but facing Su Buling's eyes of dependence and trust, It still chirped twice and disappeared in the flying snow. After Su Buling finished washing, he glanced at the window and looked a little bored. 2 days ago, he tied up Zhang Kai and ran to the foreign hall. Baiki must have known that he was coming, and could guess that he would attack the envoy team again. At this time, he should set a trap as soon as possible and wait for him to step on it. Su Buling took advantage of this point, because if he wanted to set a trap against him, Zhou Qingkai would definitely be there in person. Baiki relied on Zhou Qingkai, the national teacher, to support it. The national teacher was not only the head of the strategists, but also the spiritual leader of Baiki. As long as Zhou Qingkai could be lured in and killed, it would be a greater blow to Baiki than slaughtering 100,000 troops. It took time for Baiki to set up a trap and get people in place. The foreign hall was heavily guarded these 2 days, and he didn't have the opportunity to sneak in again, which meant that the trap had not been set. Su Buling could only wait for this. He spent these days playing chess and chatting with Zioan in the house, and there was nothing else to do. Apart from these 1,000-layer cake-like calculations, there were also more interesting things. After the disappearance of Zhang Kai, the prince of the right, Baiki knew that it was Su Buling's hand. He felt that if Su Buling didn't show up, there was little hope of finding him back. He only sent people to patrol the city symbolically, and didn't try to find him at all. As a result, Zhang Kai was stunned. No one found him hiding in the back alley of the brothel. Until last night, Su Buling couldn't stand it anymore. He was afraid that the prince of a vassal king would starve to death in the back alley of the brothel, so he made some noise to guide the officers and soldiers of Northern Qi. Northern Qi found Zhang Kai, who was almost fainted from hunger, in the broken house behind the brothel. After being rescued, Zhang Kai was naturally furious and cursed along the street. He passed by the yard more than a dozen times, but he didn't come in to take a look. "Do you still have me, the prince, in your eyes?" However, Zhang Kai had suffered 2 losses, and he obviously remembered it. He was afraid that Su Buling would not come back to take revenge, so he kept his mouth shut about how he was kidnapped and didn't reveal anything. His appearance of preferring death to speaking moved Su Buling to tears and laughter, and he felt a little embarrassed to silence him. Su Buling stood in front of the window and waited for a while until it was bright, then went downstairs to buy 2 baskets of buns and returned to the room. Kui Zioan's physical weakness improved very slowly, and she was a little sleepy. She just woke up at this time. After washing up slowly, she sat at the table with Su Buling to eat breakfast. Kui Zioan was very different from ordinary women. Even though she slept with Su Buling, her words and deeds remained unchanged. She sat upright at the table, just like in Dehua Valley, eating her buns and listening to stories. Su Buling had been racking his brains to make up stories in recent days. No matter how much he had in his stomach, he would have to pour it out. He really couldn't think of anything, so he sat at the table with Kui Zioan to play chess. The bet was to take off a piece of clothing if he lost a game, and wear a piece if he won a game. It stands to reason that playing this with a girl is a very advantageous thing, but the actual situation is completely different from what Su Buling expected. Qin, chess, calligraphy, and painting are compulsory courses for children of aristocratic families. Kui Zioan, as the legitimate daughter of the Kui family in Yuzhou, doesn't mean she can't play chess. Su Buling has been a martial arts fanatic since childhood, and his chess skills are obviously half-baked. After a fierce battle on the chessboard, he was defeated and almost lost his pants. Later, Kui Zioan was reluctant to bully her newly acquired lover, so she deliberately gave him 2 games, which allowed Su Buling to save his dignity and not chat with her naked. Compared with the 2 masters who met each other in the warm room of the inn, Yi, who was running around outside, was much more pitiful. After leaving the inn in the early morning, Yi flapped her wings and circled above Liang Cheng, mainly to monitor the movements of the foreigner pavilion. The weather in the cold winter, even if there was a little sun in the sky, was not for birds. Yi stood alone on the branch, splitting her legs. Looking around, she could not find any other birds to chat with. When she was thirsty, she could only drink snow water, and when she was hungry, she had to snatch food from the mouths of squirrels in the woods. From morning to afternoon, she stared at the trail all day, but there was no movement in the foreigner pavilion. Yi looked at the sky and saw that it was almost time to get off work, so she turned around and flew to the inn. But when she flew over a street, Yi suddenly realized that something was wrong and searched carefully between the houses. Although Yi looked plump, she was actually very different from ordinary sparrows. She had a special name in the Atlas of Rare and Exotic Animals and was known as the Yunfa mountain spirit. Being named mountain spirit by the ancients was not just as simple as being well behaved and close to people. The intelligence of Yunfa mountain spirit is far superior to that of ordinary birds and beasts. Its speed and vision are not inferior to those of hawks and falcons. It has a long lifespan and is loyal. It will starve to death when its master dies. Its only shortcoming is that it is not very aggressive and can only do reconnaissance work. Although the buildings below are uneven and there are a lot of clutter, Yi still found a little bit of bamboo green in the corner of the alley. Yi circled in the air, took a few glances, and then flew to the roof of a nearby house. After a careful inspection, she saw a small green snake slowly crawling in the thatched pile in the alley, spitting out its snake tongue from time to search for nearby smells. This little broken snake, why is it so haunting? Yi was stunned for a moment, stood on the tile, and after carefully confirming that it was correct, she chirped twice to remind the little broken snake below. The temperature is very low in winter, and even if there is sunshine, snakes can't stay for too long. Ah Ching was a little uncomfortable from the cold. When he heard the sound, he raised his little head from the bushes and looked around. When he saw the little sparrow on the roof, he opened his mouth and shook with surprise. Snakes can't make sounds, so they can't communicate with the little sparrow. Ah Ching shook a few times, then turned around and crawled out. After crawling a few steps, he shook again, motioning the little sparrow to follow. Although the little sparrow hated Ah Ching for competing for favor, it was not vague about the big things. Ah Ching was here, which meant that Chen Si Ning must be here too, so he jumped above the house and followed behind to look for her. A bird and a snake moved in such a strange way. It took them half an hour until it was dark, and they came to a dilapidated temple outside the city. A few days ago, the Prince Zhang Kai disappeared, and Liang Cheng was under martial law. The gates in and out of the city would be strictly patrolled. Zhu Manzi riding the Prince Zhang Kai's chasing wind horse would definitely not dare to swagger into Liang Cheng to stroll around. Yi flew through the sky, still far away, and saw two figures in the ruined temple, eating around a campfire. Just by the outline, she recognized that they were Zhu Manzi and Chen Sining. However, the ruined temple was not empty. From the sky, there were more than 30 people in uniform robes holding official swords on the snowy field around the ruined temple, surrounding the ruined temple and basically blocking all retreat routes. Chi. The little sparrow was anxious, and its figure flew into the ruined temple like a sharp arrow. It anxiously called out twice to remind, then turned around and flew into the night sky, rushing towards Liang Cheng. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 808. It was getting dark, and two horses were parked outside the dilapidated Buddhist temple, where a bonfire was burning. The ruined temple was drafty on all sides, and at night it started to snow again. The night wind carried the snow foam into the ruined temple. Zhu Manzi tightened the collar of his coat and sighed. I heard that Prince Wright's son was kidnapped again a few days ago. He was found yesterday. Let me take a look. It must have been Mr. Su who did it. I just don't know if Mr. Su has left Liang Cheng. Chen Xining sat by the bonfire, eating dry biscuits and bacon in her hands, looking at the brightly lit Liang Cheng in the distance. The kidnapping happened a few days ago. I'm afraid he's gone. Let Ah Ching go to the city to look for it. If there are no clues, go directly to Guiyan City. If Mr. Su wants to find the piece of agar wood, he must finally will go there. Zhu Manzi rubbed his little hands and looked at the little white snake that poked its head out of Chen Xining's sleeves to keep warm, a little worried. Snakes are afraid of the cold. Your little green snake won't freeze outside, right? Chen Xining was actually a little distressed, but the Prince Zhongkai was kidnapped, and Liangqing's martial law gates were heavily patrolled. If he entered rashly, something might happen, so he could only let Ah Ching run and look for him slowly. Ah Ching is quite resistant to freezing. If he can't bear it, he will come back on his own. It's almost time to come back. Oh. Zhu Manzi nodded, feeling a little bored just sitting there, so he continued to talk about various allusions to Mobei Jianghu. Before he could say a few words, the sound of flapping wings came from outside. Chen Xining's ears twitched slightly, feeling that the voice sounded familiar. She turned her head and saw a little sparrow flying in from outside. But before she could reach out to pick it up, the little sparrow chirped twice and flew out again. Chen Xining was a little confused and didn't understand what it meant. Zhu Manzi stayed with the little sparrow for a long time. He felt that the little sparrow was anxious and abnormal. He quickly stood up and picked up the sword beside him. There's a situation outside. Get out of here first. Only then did Chen Xining realize that the little sparrow was here to remind her. She quickly jumped up from the ground and prepared to walk towards the horses outside the temple. It's a pity that the little sparrow arrived a little late after all. The Liangcheng arrest yamen, which received the news from Kaiyufeng town, had already reached the area around the ruined temple. Before Chen Xining and Zhu Manzi walked out of the dilapidated temple hall, 3 police officers with official swords turned over from outside the courtyard wall and strode over. Zhu Manzi glanced at it and saw that the visitor had a waistband with the word Imperial hanging on his waist. His face changed slightly and he said softly. They are from the Northern Qi Royal Boxing Hall. Like the Tianzi Wolf Guard, they specialize in dealing with Jianghu people. When the Wolf Guard goes out to do business, they either patrol in 3 persons or go out in teams to arrest. Be careful that there are ambushes outside. After all, Zhu Manzi had worked in the Wolf Guard and was very familiar with the routines of these government affairs. Chen Xining became a little more cautious after hearing this, and did not directly take Zhu Manzi to escape from the opposite direction. Instead, she showed a kind smile and said, "You 3 officers, we are just staying here for the night. Please forgive me for causing any disturbance." 3 northern Qi catchers pressed their swords on their waists and came outside the main hall of the ruined temple. The leader was a middle-aged man named Shi Qian. He was Shi Jinhai's nephew and the deputy of the Yuquan Hall. Shi Jinhai was rounding up Su Buling in Liangcheng. He happened to be there. Liangcheng. Normally 2 rangers in the world would not be able to take action against someone of Shi Qian's level, but Liangcheng had been quiet for the past 2 days with nothing to do. He just received a tip from Kaiyufeng town and along the way, so Shi Qian brought his people over to take a look. In front of him were 2 girls disguised as men. They were obviously not Su Buling. Shi Qian's attitude was quite calm. He took a step forward with his sword in hand and stretched out his hand. "I'm passing through here for a routine inspection. You 2 don't need to panic. There is a way to attract the spy. After seeing it, he will leave. When people in Jianghu travel around, citations and ultimatums are a necessity, and of course few of them are genuine." Chen Xining took out the customs clearance document from her arms and threw it into Shi Qian's hand. "We are coming from Taiyuan. Our ancestral home is in Qingzi County. This is our first time in Mobei. We hope it will be convenient for you." Shi Qian caught the guide, opened it and took a look at it. Apparently he didn't believe it, so he said casually. "Zhu 12, Chen Zhongning, The two girls have very unique names. There are not many clean people in Jianghu. No matter how many wolf guards there are, it is impossible to investigate them all. The same is true for northern Qi. Zhu Manzi knew where these people were going. After thinking about it, he took out a bag of broken silver from his arms and threw it over. It's easy to make a living with a cheap name. You can pick it up casually. I'm sorry for bothering the three officials to come here on a snowy day. This little money will be used as an apology for the two of us, and I'll treat the three officials to a drink to warm themselves up. Shi Qian is the deputy of the Yuquan Gym, so he definitely doesn't like this little money, but there are rules between the government and the people in the world, and there is no need to refuse what is due. Shi Qian waited for a moment, nodded, and threw the document back to Chen Xining. Zhu Manzi breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that she had passed the test, but before she could see her off, Shi Gan, the leader, turned his head and looked at the two horses outside. The horse is good, quite strong. The two wind-chasing horses were wearing riding jackets. In order to walk on the slippery ice, their hooves were also wrapped, and the doorway was basically invisible from the outside. When the policeman next to him heard this, he turned and walked towards the horse. Chen Xining and Zhu Manzi both felt nervous. Shi Qian pressed the official sword on his waist again, keeping his eyes on the two of them, paying attention to every move. Soon, the policeman walked up to the two horses, lifted up the horse clothes and took a look, but was stunned on the spot. Shi Qian waited for a moment and saw that the policeman didn't speak, so he asked, "What horse?" The policeman was a little in disbelief. After carefully identifying it, he softly said, It seems that these are the horses of the national teacher and the Prince Zhongheng, which were captured by Su Buling on the battlefield in Taiyuan at the beginning of the year. These two horses are definitely the ones. There is no mistake." As soon as the words fell, the night fell silent. The broken temple with fallen leaves and snow on the ground was filled with cold wind. The bonfire in the Buddhist hall was swaying, and the shadow of the broken Buddha statue was reflected on the wall. The smile on Chen Xining's face disappeared, and she stood up straight and looked at Shi Qian frankly. The two horses were collected on the road. "I really don't know the details. I hope you three can help me and don't hurt the harmony. This is more of a warning than an explanation." Shi Qian understood the meaning of the words. His fingers tapped the handle of the knife and his eyes looked at the two people, also judging the depth of the enemy. If Su Buling was really here, Shi Qian would probably have to thank him and then take his people away neatly, because he couldn't beat him. But the two girls in front of him didn't look like Su Buling at all. As for martial arts, how high could two women's martial arts be? After a moment of silence, Shi Qian held the hilt of the knife and raised his chin. "The two girls, come with me. If what you said is true, I will let you go after the matter of the wind-chasing horse is investigated clearly." Swish. Before the voice fell, a cold light suddenly appeared in the dilapidated temple. Chen Xining unsheathed the silver moon scimitar behind her waist, and a cold light slid under the firelight. The knife flew directly to Shi Qian's face like a meteor. Zhu Manzi is not a little girl who is powerless. She has participated in many life and death battles in the Wolf Guards. She has practiced martial arts with Su Buling for nearly 2 years. She also has a sword saint father to motivate her. She is cute at ordinary times, but she is not slow at all when she really fights. Almost at the same time, Zhu Manzi unsheathed the long sword behind her, bent her leg slightly, and then flicked hard, and the blade went straight to Shi Qian's heart. Shi Qian was prepared. When the opponent's shoulder moved, the official sword at his waist was already unsheathed. He leaned back to avoid the flying scimitar, and his right leg turned into a steel whip, sweeping directly towards Zhu Manzi who was thrusting with the sword. 10,000 words of update. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 809. The northern Qi constables squatting around the ruined temple jumped onto the wall and roof at the same time after hearing the noise in the courtyard, unsheathed their single swords at their waists, and fell into the deserted courtyard full of dead leaves. The bonfire in the ruined Buddhist temple moved with the wind, the sound of swords was piercing, and the rustling of robes rose and fell. Chen Si-ning slashed with the scimitar in her hand, and the jade beads were still in her hand. The silver moon scimitar flew past Shigan's nose. The constable standing behind had no time to dodge, and the precious sword that cut through iron like mud chopped off half of his neck, and blood splashed on the dilapidated wooden door of the Buddhist temple. At the same time, Shigan took advantage of the situation and swept Zhu Manzi's side with a dragon's tail. Zhu Manzi rushed to Shigan with a sharp sword in his hand, raised his hand and stabbed with the sword, wanting to use the shaking the mountain taught by his father Zulu to kill the leader in front of him instantly. Shaking the mountain was Manzi's life-saving move when he was in Chang'an City. He could use branches to pierce the wall now, holding a sword. If he wanted to kill Shi Qian, who was completely unprepared, he would basically die as soon as the sword came out. But Shi Qian himself was quite powerful, at least he looked stronger than Zhu Manzi. Chen Si-ning didn't know that Manzi had a killer move, so she naturally didn't dare to let Manzi take risks. When Manzi just rushed out, she used her left hand to throw out the long whip behind her waist, directly put it on Manzi's waist, and pulled it hard with one hand, forcibly pulling Manzi back who was stabbing forward. At the same time, the right hand holding the jade bead also pulled back. Shi Qian's leg swept away, and he wanted to stand up and counter-attack with a knife, but when he saw Chen Si-ning's right hand pulling back, his heart was chilled, and he lay directly on the ground. This choice was obviously right. The curved knife flew out of the door, cut the neck of the constable behind, and flew back in the air. If Shi Qian hadn't been on guard, he would have had to lie down on the spot. Zhu Manzi was forcibly pulled back, still a little dazed, holding the sword but not charging again, but asking, "Why did you pull me?" He almost died. Chen Si-ning didn't believe it at all, and directly pulled Manzi behind. "You stay still." After saying that, he stomped his feet on the ground, and his thighs full of explosive power bounced the whole person out, and slashed at Shi Qian on the ground with another knife in the air. Shi Qian jumped up from the ground and blocked the flying blade. He realized that the woman in front of him was a bit powerful, and quickly retreated outside the Buddhist temple. "Let's go together. Kill." More than 30 constables holding official swords surrounded them from all directions. Chen Si-ning's scimitar was only the length of a forearm, and its shape was like a crescent moon, which was considered a short weapon. In a single fight, it might have an advantage of an inch shorter and an inch more dangerous, but facing a large number of enemies, the most popular weapon is always the one that opens and closes. It is obvious that using a short weapon will suffer. Many constables led by Shi Qian have been dealing with people from the underworld for many years. They formed a formation without any discussion, with shields in front and spearmen in the back, assisted by swordsmen and axemen. Not to mention Chen Si-ning's scimitar, even with a normal sword, it is difficult to touch the enemy behind the round shield. Zhu Manzi was born in this school, and knew that she would definitely suffer a loss if she fought like this, so she wanted to go forward to help Chen Si-ning, but she was stunned before she moved. Chen Si-ning turned around and rushed out of the Buddhist hall, and put the scimitar on the top of the long whip in her hand in mid-air. The two weapons merged into one and turned into a flying sickle like a scorpion's tail. If the whip is used well, it can have the effect of a spear and a stick, and it has the flexibility that a spear and a stick cannot have. Chen Si-ning held the long whip in one hand and spun like the wind, holding the silver moon scimitar and swinging it for a half moon, and directly hit the nearest shield. Snap! The whip tip was almost terrifying at the tail speed, and a deafening explosion exploded in the air. The curved knife, which could cut through iron like mud, played the role of a meteor hammer, splitting the round shield in half with almost no hindrance, and also cut off the arm behind, and cut a bloody gap on the chest. Ah! A shrill scream sounded in the night. Shi Qian was flanking with a single knife, and there was a bit of surprise in his eyes. The most feared thing in the martial arts world is to meet a master who uses strange weapons. The methods of swords, spears, swords and halberds are similar, and there are conventional ways to deal with them, but strange weapons are not the same. Before fighting, you don't know the opponent's methods at all. If you want to break the moves, you will probably have to risk your life. Chen Sining's whiptail knife is a self-created routine. The closest thing in the world should be the hair-tail knife of the secret guard Lao Yi, but Lao Yi's hair-tail knife relies on the neck to generate power, which can only hit hard. It is a world of difference from the power of both hands, and it is impossible to have such a great destructive power as Chen Sining. After Chen Sining smashed the round shield with one blow, he pulled the long whip back and shook it violently backward. The long whip suddenly straightened under the blessing of the dark power. The closer the whip was to the tip of the whip, the faster it was. The scimitar on the tip of the whip almost hit the chest of the constable who was attacking from behind. Bang! Amidst the wind and snow, a cloud of blood mist burst out from behind the constable, revealing the tip of the scimitar. Chen Sining pulled back the scimitar again, and the hook-like scimitar tore the constable's lungs. As blood and flesh flew, it swept towards the enemy on the side. In the blink of an eye, the two died almost at the same time. Zhu Manzi could only see Chen Sining swinging the whip twice. The scimitar on the tip of the whip was too fast, and only the afterimage of the blade could be seen. Ah! Screams were heard everywhere, and the ruined temple was in a mess in an instant. Chen Sining's movements were smooth and flowing. With the whip swinging rapidly, the constables who were surrounded and killed were basically killed immediately. Occasionally, he would use his strength to defend himself and cut off the hands and feet of several people, making it impossible for them to get close. After killing several of his subordinates, Shi Qian finally saw some tricks and said angrily, "Meteor hammer, close combat." The whiptail knife used by Chen Sining is very agile. It can be retracted at a touch, like picking flowers in the wind or hunting butterflies in the leaves. With a scorpion tail-like curved knife in front, it can kill anyone who touches it. It does not require too much brute force, which is completely different from the meteor hammer that kills the enemy with impact force. But it must be said that the principles of the two are not much different. Both require a certain length of soft structure to increase the speed of the tail end. If the distance is too close and it cannot be shaken off, it will become useless. It is not impossible to break the whiptail knife by breaking the meteor hammer. With Shi Qian's order, the remaining nearly 20 constables rushed forward fearlessly with their weapons, trying to close the distance and limit the use of Chen Sining's weapons. However, Chen Sining is best at saving his life, not killing people. Seeing that his opponent has changed, a few smoke balls fell from his sleeves. Bang bang bang. The smoke balls exploded on the ground, and the crosswind swept, and the smoke instantly covered the entire abandoned courtyard. The northern Qi constables who were surrounded and killed lost their vision and immediately became chaotic. Chen Sining hid in the smoke, judging the position of the opponent only by the sound. The long whip and scimitar in his hands were like the soul-snatching judge's pen, accurately killing the surrounding constables. Shi Qian had the highest martial arts among the crowd, and could also determine Chen Sining's position by sound. At the moment when the smoke exploded, he finally found an opportunity, flew up and kicked Chen Sining's waist. Chen Sining also lost her vision in the smoke. She relied on her ears to locate, which was obviously half a beat slower than her eyes. She noticed the strong wind coming and directly raised the wrist guard on her wrist to block. Shi Qian was the descendant of Shi Jinhai, and the power of this kick was definitely not bad. Ding! The whip kick hit the wrist guard, making a sound of metal colliding. Chen Xining was covered with protective gear, but she suffered a disadvantage in size after all. She was kicked and slid back a distance before she was forced to stop retreating. Shi Qian swept his leg, not giving his opponent any chance to recover. As soon as he landed, he wanted to raise his knife to block Chen Xining, making it difficult for her to swing the long whip in her hand. However, Shi Qian had just retracted his leg and had not taken a step when he staggered. He had just kicked Chen Xining's right leg, and she felt a piercing pain, like red-hot molten iron, raging in the flesh and blood of her leg. Oops! Shi Qian's face suddenly changed, knowing that he was poisoned, and angrily cursed, "Despicable," and then quickly retreated from the battlefield. After Chen Xining stopped retreating, she completely ignored Shi Qian and dealt with the remaining enemies again. After all, in her eyes, Shi Qian was already a dead man. The little white dragon is one of the most poisonous snakes. If a person is bitten by a strong snake, he can only lose his limbs to save his life if there is no doctor like Zhongli Jiju by his side. The only shortcoming of a bai is that he cannot paralyze the enemy. He can still fight if he can endure the severe pain without risking his life. Therefore, Chen Xining usually uses a king, which has a strong paralyzing effect, to bite people. If the opponent is bitten by a bai and chooses to retreat, there is no need to chase him. The faster he runs, the faster the poison will take effect. Even if he has 2 legs, he can't run back to Liangzhou city. In the night, the blades danced quickly and screams were endless. Chen Xining hid in the smoke and could only see a bloody flying sickle raging in the field. Zhu Manzi stood in the Buddhist hall with a long sword in her hand. She couldn't see anything. She wanted to help, but she was afraid that Chen Xining, who was red-eyed with killing, would chop her up. She could only watch Chen Xining stand out. But at this moment, Zhu Manzi finally understood why Su Buling said, "Everyone below Zhangxiang is an ant." From this scene, it seems that killing a person is easier than killing a pig. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 810. A black canopy rose in the sky, and hundreds of lights lit up in the city. In the room on the second floor of the inn, Su Buling was wearing white thin trousers, sitting upright next to the chess table, holding a white piece and gently stroking it, thinking about the murderous situation on the chessboard. With his heroic brows and stern and extraordinary face, he has a certain aloofness of wake up to hold the power of the world, but lie drunk in the lap of a beautiful woman. Kui Zioan lay on her side on the soft couch opposite. Her posture was a little lazy, she was wrapped in thick clothes, she felt a little fatter. She pinched the sunspot with her slender jade fingers, placed it in the empty space on the chessboard, and said crisply, "5 in a row. You lost again." Su Buling threw his pieces into the chess basket with a hint of hopelessness in his eyes. "In the past, when I played chess and bet on clothes with my baby, the baby would complain to him in shame and annoyance, and then he would go to bed as soon as possible." Fortunately for Zioan, he didn't see Zioan's shyness, but he was embarrassed. "Later, I switched to backgammon, thinking I could get back a few games, but the result was still the same." Kui Zioan was very serious about her punishment, and it would be hard to say that Zioan didn't understand the taste, so she could only accept the punishment honestly. Kui Zioan picked up the ink pen used to paint rouge, raised her hand to Su Buling's chest, and wrote right, 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 then separated the black and white chess pieces and put them back into the basket, with a crooked look on her face. "Go on." Su Buling looked at the positive writing on his body. Although it had little impact, it was extremely insulting. He wanted to write a few words on Zioan in turn. He looked at the sky outside. "It's already dark, why don't you rest?" Kui Zioan raised her face and raised her eyes to glance at Su Buling. "Why, you want to touch Auntie's conscience and tell a story again?" Su Buling spread his hands slightly, his eyes clear. You're quite honest. Kui Zioan snorted softly and looked outside. Yi hasn't come back yet, let's wait. Speaking of the little sparrow, Su Buling also frowned. It was almost time, why did Yi still work overtime? Su Buling stood up and glanced out the window, only to see a black shadow like a sharp arrow streaking across the night sky at an alarming speed. In the blink of an eye, it flew from the city wall to the window of the inn. The little sparrow forcibly hovered, flapping its small wings at the window, and chirping anxiously. Su Buling could understand the general meaning of Yi and knew that he was in trouble, so he asked him to go over and help quickly, but he didn't know who to help or where exactly. It was the first time Su Buling encountered Yi so anxiously. His heart sank. Without saying anything, he turned around, grabbed the straight knife, and jumped out of the window with Kui Zioan on his back. Kui Zioan knew something was urgent, so she lay on Su Buling's back, shrank her neck to avoid the strong wind, and asked, "What happened?" Su Buling didn't know, but no matter what happened, it was definitely imminent. He didn't dare to leave Kui Zioan alone in the city. At the moment, he could only carry Kui Zioan on his back, rising and falling between the buildings, and speeding out of the city. Fortunately, Kui Zioan is as tall as a willow, has basically no weight, and does not slow down much. The little sparrow had wings after all, and it tried its best at this time. It was as fast as lightning in the night, and even Su Buling could barely keep up. The speed of one person and one bird is beyond ordinary people's cognition. The officers and soldiers patrolling the streets were alerted when they heard the sound of breaking wind. When they looked up, there was no trace of him on the roof. After running like this for half a stick of incense, Kui Zioan's face almost went numb, and Su Buletinling finally slowed down a little. After running and sprinting continuously for so long, Su Buling's breath became much heavier, his lungs were about to burst, and the ruined temple outside the city also appeared in front of him. There was a faint light of fire in the ruined temple, and the remaining smoke could still be vaguely seen, but it was silent and there was no sound. When Su Buling saw the smoke, he secretly thought something was wrong. He saw Chen Xining using smoke pellets many times in South Vietnam. The remaining smoke was obviously caused by Chen Xining. Why did she come here? Su Buling frowned and had no time to think about the reason. He strode to the vicinity of the ruined temple. Halfway through, the straight sword was unsheathed. When he was still a few feet away, he flew up and jumped directly onto the courtyard wall. With the faint light of the fire, with a startling glance, I saw. Ah! The wind and snow are blowing, and the cold wind is blowing. The smell of blood filled the dilapidated temple, and blood flowed under the dead leaves and seeped into the old floor tiles beneath the snow. More than 20 corpses lay on the ground, almost forming a circle, with a 10-foot wide open space in the middle without any corpses. Zhu Manzi, who was wearing a light-colored coat, stood in the center of the circle, with his green feng sword pointing diagonally at the ground, and a bamboo hat covering half of his face. The clothes are not stained with blood, and the sword is not stained with blood. Between the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood, there is a chivalrous spirit of killing one person in 10 steps and leaving no trace in 1,000 miles. Su Buletinling? Kui Zioan. Little Sparrow. Su Buletinling staggered and looked at the handsome heroine in the courtyard in disbelief. He almost fell off the courtyard wall. He looked carefully to make sure he had recognized the right person. In the deserted courtyard, Zhu Manzi was holding his sword and looking at the corpses on the ground to see if there were any that needed to be touched. When he heard the sound of wings flapping, he knew that Su Buling was coming, and his big eyes showed surprise. Looking up, he saw Su Buling standing on the wall, dumbfounded, with eyes full of astonishment, shocked with doubts with admiration, looking like my Manzi is so powerful. Zhu Manzi was slightly stunned. Down. However, Zhu Manzi's brain has been quick since he was a child, and he immediately realized why Su Buling had such an expression. So Zhu Manzi gracefully held up a sword flower, returned the sword neatly to its sheath, and picked up the bamboo hat, revealing two sweet dimples. "Mr. Su, you are late." His movements are smooth and his voice is calm and easygoing. "I have to say, I have practiced the sword sheathing pose countless times in front of the mirror. It is full of style and looks more chic than Su Buletin Ling." Su Buling was shocked and a little dazed. He was about to say, "We've been apart for 3 days, and we should look at each other with new eyes," but in a blink of an eye, he glanced around and found more than 20 corpses on the ground. They were all covered with knife wounds, not even a single sword wound. In the hall of the ruined temple, Chen Xining, who had just finished dealing with all the enemies, picked up her luggage and came out. She wanted to move with Manzi first, but when she looked up and saw Su Buling on the wall, surprise suddenly appeared in her eyes. "Mr. Su, why did you come here so quickly?" Su Buling was speechless. With Chen Xining here, it wouldn't be surprising if there were dozens of corpses on the ground. Fortunately, he thought Manzi had nothing to lose, so he was happy in vain. Kui Zioan also suddenly realized it. After Su Buling jumped off the wall, he got off his back and said crisply, "Manzi, I was curious just now. You couldn't even defeat the big white goose, so why did you suddenly become so powerful? It turns out that this girl helped you." Zhu Manzi finally saw Su Buling's surprised look. He couldn't say that he had just struck out with a sword and spent the rest of the time standing in the ruined temple watching the show. She quickly explained, "Of course I'm not that powerful. Well, Xining and I were so close together when we moved together. It was only through our cooperation that we were able to win. Oops." Before Zhu Manzi could finish his words, his buttocks were slapped and it was very hot. Su Buling stood in front of Manzi, with his hands on his hips and a slightly serious expression. "Who asked you to come here?" Zhu Manzi was immediately frightened, lowered his head weakly, and glanced at Chen Xining next to him. "Well, it was Xining who turned me over. She said she wanted to go out for a walk and asked me to take her with her. Without thinking about it, she accidentally ended up in Baiki." Chen Xining was a little nervous, glanced at Su Buling, and said softly, "Last time Mr. Su left suddenly, which was a bit hasty. Ah Ching and Ah Bai were greedy, so I..." Su Buling shook his head. He had come here. Chen Xining was not bad at martial arts and nothing happened. It was not good for him to speak too harshly. He sighed. Okay, we've made such a big scene. Reinforcements will be coming soon. Let's change places first." Seeing that Su Buling was not angry, Zhu Manzi suddenly became happy and quickly hugged Su Buling's arm and rubbed it. "It's better, Mr. Su." Chen Xining led the horse and walked forward, glanced at Su Buling, and suddenly realized something was wrong. Because he came here in a hurry, Su Buling didn't clean up at all. At this time, he was only wearing a pair of white thin pants, with his arms and chest bare, as if he had just gotten out of bed, and there were a few words written on his chest. Kui Zioan was similar. She took off and put on clothes while playing chess, and her clothes were a bit untidy. The wind had just blown all the way, and her hair was frizzy. She looked like she had just woken up and put on her clothes haphazardly. When Chen Xining saw these clues, she naturally thought wrongly and whispered, "Mr. Su, you came here in a hurry." Zhu Manzi hugged Su Buling for a few moments and then realized that Su Buling was not wearing any clothes. His face suddenly turned red and he let go of his arms. "Mr. Su, why are you not wearing any clothes?" Zhu Manzi had been on the ship for more than half a year, and had long understood the meaning of righteousness from Yu Fu's mouth. At this time, he glanced at Kui Zioan next to him, and said sadly, "Sister Kui, what were you doing just now?" Kui Zioan was not shy. When Manzi asked, she answered seriously, I just play chess with him, and every time I lost, I took off one piece of clothing. Ahem. Su Buling's old face was a little helpless, and he quickly raised his hand. There is movement in the distance, don't say anything, go back first. Oh. Kui Zioan could see Su Buling's thoughts and smiled, without revealing Su Buling's background in front of other girls. Chen Xining is not a stupid girl, her reasoning ability is first-rate. When she heard these words, she understood everything and was a little stunned. After all, in her eyes, Su Buling was a gentleman who didn't eat the fireworks of the world, so how could he play with a girl? This kind of trick that takes advantage of both winning and losing? However, this girl seemed to be Su Buling's woman, and there was nothing to talk about between the couple. Chen Xining thought about it, but still didn't take it to heart. After several people left the ruined temple, Zhu Manzi remembered that Kui Zioan had never met Chen Xining before, and introduced him again. Sister Kui, this is Chen Xining, the third princess of South Vietnam. She came to the boat just after you and Mr. Su left. Kui Zioan blinked and looked back at Chen Xining. Your mother is the niece of King Wei, right? When your mother married to South Vietnam, I heard the elders in the family talk about it. After all, you have to call me aunt. Zhu Manzi frowned, looking a little confused. Su Buling calculated carefully. If Chen Xining's mother was still alive, she would be in her 40s now. She was indeed of the same generation as King Su, Songji, and others. There seemed to be no problem in calling her aunt, but the relationship was a bit far away. Chen Xining was equally at a loss. Since she was her aunt, she must be the elder on her mother's side. She looked at Kui Zioan in confusion. Who is the senior? Kui Zioan smiled and said, Kui Zioan, the former queen, you should have heard of me. Chen Xining staggered.